Welcome, folks. This is the second in a series of podcasts about platform thinking, platform design, platform engineering, platforming as a verb, potentially. Today, I have my good friend Matt Barcomb as a guest. Matt's well known in many circles for being a product management guru type person. So I think he'll have a lot of interesting things to talk about around that. Do you want to introduce yourself, Matt?
Hey, I'm Matt. I don't know if I'm a guru. I'm not sure what circles I'm known in. They're very small circles. Yeah, I love product. My background was in engineering. I kind of stumbled and bumbled into management. I stumbled and bumbled into product management. I stumbled and bumbled into consulting, into executive leadership, product leadership as an executive, back into consulting, and now I'm here trying to kind of do my own thing around tech boom shift, promoting things around organization design, through something I'm calling the key forces of change, and through some leadership development that I'm calling oblique leadership. None of it's novel. It's all from a billion books that I've read. I blame most of it on Jabe. And and yeah, and I think product is nice, although I think it's a confusing word in itself, and platform is probably equally confusing.
Yeah, so let's start with can we try to define product management at least from your perspective?
Product management.
I tend to get frustrated when I hear people talk about like platform as a product because I say that's great except no one knows how to manage a product either. So I'm not sure how much
Right.
that's
No,
adding to
yeah.
the conversation. So like what how would I know if I was looking at like good product management? What would it look like? What's how would you define it?
It's a good question. I think good product management means you understand what your market needs and also probably your customers and how to leverage those needs to meet a business objective. I think that's pretty straightforward. It's finding the intersection between those two things. And then of course making sure that you've got a viable solution. It gets more complicated underneath all the devils in the details about making sure that it's sustainable, maintainable, blah 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 for the long run. But I would
Mm,
say the basics is that
yeah.
there's people that have needs. You're meeting those needs to meet a business objective.
So you use the term viable or validated, and
Yes,
do you
yes.
like because like how much of it is experimentation ish things in your mind or
I think, well, I don't know. I feel I try to take a pragmatic approach to the experiment. I mean, there's something that we don't know what we don't know, and but there's different stages of life cycle, different levels of validation. I don't think Uber did not need to validate that we needed transportation. Uber needed to validate that we should go against everything our mothers taught us and get into a car with strangers we met on the internet, right?
yeah, yep,
So it's what are we validating? Sure. Like,
yep,
do we need to validate the technology works, the on demand, the in the pocket, the GPS? Like, sure.
yep,
There's all those kinds of things about the users, about the technology, but we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. You take that fast forward to like a cash cow app, you're thinking about sunsetting it, you've got an installed user base. How much validation do you really need to do? Like, you should still do some checking, like you need to add a new workflow or move the button around the or something, right? Like,
yep.
you should still do some checking, but man, like the risk is a lot lower. Maybe we can do the validation through deployment, A/B checking, rollbacks. Like, that's very different than maybe we shouldn't build software because we should go talk to some humans to find
Yeah,
out if we even got a good idea. And
yeah,
there's
yeah.
lots of shades of gray in between.
No, that's cool. I mean, like Uber's a great example of this like theory of a platform. We should define platform next, but like it's a two-sided market, right? So the problem Uber's trying to solve is both how to attract customers, like people who are traveling, and I think at least when I was growing up in Brooklyn, one of the things was we always got what were called black cars instead of taxis, and it was just because we were in Brooklyn and there weren't that many taxis, and
Hmm.
so there was like a number. I think it was 777 or something silly like that, and. And that's what you would call. So you would be getting into strangers' cars. Of course, they'd all be black cars and Lincolns. Some of them beat to hell, whatever. But from what I understand from Uber's early days, and or at least their kind of like threshold for success in a market had more to do with attracting drivers because if they could get enough drivers, they could maintain the
Yeah.
riders that they got. But if they couldn't get enough drivers, then people would try to get a car and say like going to take you half an hour, 45 minutes to get a car, and people are like, this isn't interesting. I don't like this. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Do you have enough driver demand to pick somebody up in a timely enough fashion to be competitive against the existing alternatives that they had?
Yep.
And somewhere very quickly after that was how can we extract as much value from the labor as possible to
Absolutely.
try to hit our
Absolutely.
overarching business objectives.
Yeah. Have you? There's a great term. I'm gonna forget his name right now, but there's a great term this writer's writing about. He calls it the Initification of platforms.
I love it already.
And so, like, if you have a two-sided market, right? Again, you're trying to attract drivers so you can get customers. If you can't attract the drivers, you can't get the customers. But once you get both sides working, like you get enough drivers to get the customers, and you get the customers to give up their cars, and you destroy the local taxi market by making it unprofitable. Now, now you have an extraction machine because both sides can't let go of each other. So you
Yeah,
just extract as much as possible, and
yeah.
and shitifies the platform is what he calls it. I love it.
I think it's good. I mean, in theory, that happens anytime there becomes either an actual monopoly or a de facto monopoly on a service. I mean, we like to tell ourselves that that's like the natural order of things, and I agree with that to an extent.
Yep.
If we come up with a better idea, a better implementation, a better whatever, it's the thing that is able to do that. But I mean, this is maybe getting a little bit off topic, but there's so many different ways of protecting and extracting and lobbying and governing and all. It just becomes a very complicated system. And
Yep. I mean,
yeah, down.
our mutual friend Peter Thiel wrote that book One, which is exactly this. I mean, it's literally an explanation of how to create a monopoly and extract as much as possible.
Yeah.
But I do think like one of the things that makes me think about. We still have to define platforms, but it makes me think about this idea that sometimes I notice in organizations where they they put a bunch of engineers over there in a room and they build the platform without talking to anybody, and then they try to force it on the developers or the operators. Right? They try to
Mhm.
force the people into the market as opposed to kind of this maybe more interesting or enlightened version of it, which is like maybe we should talk to the developers and the operators, figure out what their most pressing problems is, and develop those things first, and like
Yeah.
create a snowball as opposed to creating a whole
as
baseball field.
as bad as it is in product management, like for market facing products, I think it's worse for platform management
Mm,
because it's you're usually building something for technologists, and it's
mm.
technologists building it also. So it's very easy to fool yourself into, well, I'm in the same boat. This is how
I
I would
would.
use it. So
That's
this is
right.
right.
Yep.
I see the same thing. I mean, I actually see the same kind of pattern in product management when, like, let's say you're at a healthcare company that's, healthcare SaaS something, and their idea is to bring in SMEs from the industry, which is probably a good idea, like to bring in some of that knowledge in house. But when you take that, whatever, clinical trials planner, and you make them the lead product manager of your clinical trials SaaS product or whatever, um, there's a danger in.
Absolutely. Yep.
Now, maybe it's less dangerous than having me make assumptions about what clinical trials would mean, but it's still the danger. And maybe it's a way to accelerate it because doing the discovery does take time and it does cost money if you're trying to launch. I mean, I'm very comfortable with gray and trying to understand what the real things are. I would never say it's the wrong thing to do, but it is a slippery slope. And I do see that's I see that in the case for anything that's a platform built by technologists for technologists. It's very easy for the technologists to say, I am one of me. Like, you are
Right.
one of me. So
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, so and I also get like the feeling to some extent. Well, I'll come back to that. What would you like to join the party of trying to define what a platform is?
What is a
Because
platform?
like I mean,
I think it's
everybody has a
hilarious.
different opinion about it. But
What
like,
is a platform?
what would you think about as a platform?
I don't, yeah, it's a trap. It's a party, I guess. One of my favorite things to do is like go to product conferences and ask, like, what's a product?
Yeah.
And people, like, you'll spend at least like an hour just, oh, is a seatbelt a product? Well, it depends. Can you sell it to car manufacturer? Well, yeah. If you sell it, it's a product. Well, then what if you can't sell it? Does it's not a product? And if you can't sell it, well, so I don't know. Well, So I think of so I like to kind of think of like big P and little P platforms. So on one level, I think of like little P platform is more of an org design construct. So
Mm,
it's anything that I would consider more of a horizontal concern. It's a cross-cutting concern that permanently enables multiple market-facing value streams or customer-facing value streams. So
hmm
if you kind of do the vertical horizontal thing, plus
hmm
you get to do cool little hand gestures like that, and it looks like you're dancing,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which is very important.
Absolutely.
Um, so that would be that. When I think of like what's big P platform, I think like big P platform is the people that are saying DevOps is dead, long live platform, which is DevOps with some more stuff around it.
Yeah.
And or it's our platform that was our back end for our cross-cutting products, but we've now figured out how to monetize it as well.
Yeah.
So if it's big P platform, it's more like platform as a product or platform as dev enablement or something like that. We
Mm,
still have users who are our internal users, stakeholders, consumers. And I still think you'd still want to follow good user customer discovery practices. If anything, I would suggest people are more irresponsible if you're not, because your customers are right the fuck over there. They just go
right.
talk to
Yeah.
them. Like
Yeah.
it's not like having to set up stakeholder interviews or custom. Like it's just right
Yeah.
there. Just go talk to them.
Um, so I used to do this when I was a CTO. I used to probably make. I was the CTO. That's a terrible habit that executives have. They make people do things. I did learn this lesson, by the way, because eventually they came to me and told me, "You don't like when you do that." But
Did
anyway,
you make and bash? Sorry.
I tried not to
Oh,
bash, but I did tell
fair.
them to do things that I thought were interesting, and they basically came back and were like, "You think those things are interesting? We do not think they're interesting." Anyway, so I set up an experiment with my developers where I basically had them do user experience interviews. Like they had to, if they were going to release something into the world, they were responsible for like following the feature into production with a
Yeah.
particular customer. And so I think, but I think that's still relatively rare that developer. I mean, like in most of these orgs, right? You've got like a user experience designer or some design team over there
Yeah.
that talks to customers for you, and then somehow it gets filtered through a product owner onto a backlog, and then the developers develop it, and the burger that they flipped that is the user story goes out that window, and they have no idea where it went. So I like what should like how should like platform I love this idea of platform management in alignment with product management. If we were gonna like make a idea or make a practice called platform management, what skills would a platform manager learn from a product manager,
I
just to
think I
start with?
think it would be a lot of the same stuff at a high level. I mean, you still want to talk to your users and understand your needs, and then leverage those to achieve business objectives. I think, in a very cut and dry case where you're talking about, typical market-facing products, there's a market segment who's got an unmet need, and you're going to try to turn that usually into revenue. So it's
Mm,
it's needs for dollars, right?
yep.
I think one of the challenges of product is you're still in the needs for dollars business,
Yep.
but it's at least one step removed. Like you're enabling the dollar. So
Yep.
how can I, whatever, like how can I help the market facing value stream teams, the streamline teams, if we're going to do the skeleton pace terminology stuff. Um, like how can we help them do things better, faster, more consistently with even quality? How can we to reduce the total cost of ownership of our product, or increase the product's total lifetime value to the company by
Yep.
having an enabling platform,
Yep.
right? Not even getting into the human aspects of the dependency management or how they might work together, because that's also a topic, but it's a little bit different than just the overarching
Mm-hmm.
what would we do as platform managers. So it's still just going and talking to them, understanding what their needs are. I think one of the things that I always wind up doing when I work with these more platformy horizontal functions in companies is there's I think the set of potential strategies for market facing products is much broader.
Yeah.
I think the potential strategies for platforms is much narrower. You
Mm,
could probably focus on primarily ease of use,
mm-hmm.
and then probably low to no app dev reuse, right?
Mm,
So just onboarding, push button endpoints exist, everything can use it. Beyond that, if you are able to truly monetize your platform, like you've made something that's so useful that you actually can sell it to a market, like
mm,
that's cool too.
yeah.
Um, a quick little sidebar, that is a beef that I kind of have. It seems like everybody's so wildly infatuated with monetizing platforms that as soon as people can even like smell data or services, they're like, we're gonna make money off of our platform. And it's like you can't even figure out how to service your internal people first, like
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So maybe pull the horses back a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think those are some lessons to learn. I think it's a narrower focus. I think platforms have I think platforms have other challenges that aren't. I mean, it's sort of due to their like platforms. I mean, as hard as it is to get good work done in like project style funded organizations, however much challenge a vertical has with that, a horizontal has it 10 times worse. So there's lots of org design constraints depending on where your org is on like stream alignment, platform alignment stuff, how they do strategy and strategy deployment, how they do funding and staffing allocation, like all those things
Hmm.
hit platforms way harder. But again, I don't know, like slightly different topic. When we think about platform management or platform leadership, the same way I would think about product management or product leadership, at maybe that CPO-ish level or whatever that would be for the platform
Yeah.
equivalent, I would put those same concerns around org design, budgeting, staffing, strategy deployment on that person's shoulders as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, so like one of the things I think there's like a couple ways that I tend to think of a platform that gets a little bit at some of the stuff you were kind of poking at. So like I think in a lot of organizations right now they're adopting a value stream approach with a flow model. Um, I like to think of it as they're almost like starting from the dev team, like the product team, and then going towards production, and that's what so it's like there's a build pipeline, and it should be mirrored somehow by the value stream of like a set of teams that put something into production or something like that. And I think that's interesting, and is certainly a good way of improving the flow of a single product into a market. But the idea of a product line, which is roughly where these ideas come from out of Lean, it's not just a product line, right? Like there's also product families, right? So
Mhm.
like Honda, same engine, many cars. Honda, same, basics, chassis structure. You can get it with a sedan on top. You can get it with a minivan on top, right? Because there's a product line, a set of common features that are produced in a common way. And then there's customizations or specializations that get put on top and become a specific product, right? Um, so I think there's like that version is interesting to think through because I feel like in that vision in my mind, instead of having like a straight line, like many straight lines in your organization from each product team, you have Y lines, right? You have like things that come narrower and narrower as they get back towards the back end. And another way to like describe this like thing, this like relationship, I think that's different between products and platforms than what I kind of see other people do. Like, so you walk into Starbucks, right? Uh, Starbucks has an infrastructure. It's got some machines, it's got a building, it's got some counters, some tables. That's the infrastructure. And I assume they can instantiate that infrastructure quite quickly because they seem to pop up all over the place all the
Sure.
time, and they can reproduce them by sending the right parts and
You
all
just
that kind of
plant a
stuff.
coffee bean in the ground and yeah,
Poof,
Starbucks
yeah,
pops right out.
Starbucks pops out. But when you're in there as a customer, you don't just walk in and order coffee, right? Not anymore, at least. You walk in and there's a series of products, and you have an experience with the bartender, or the coffee
Barista, yeah.
barista, and 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 I usually say to people like, if you walk into a Starbucks and you order coffee like we used to order coffee from the gas station, which is like, give me a paper cup. um, you're not having you're not having a Starbucks experience, right? You're not. So it's like this combination of like um, knowing how to play this particular game, this role where you talk to the barista a certain way, the barista talks back a certain way, and having many products that you can self-assemble into what you want your experience to be. I want some chocolate with it. I'd like that, um, so that it's like it's a
Mm.
combination of like user created value. That's the assembly of the parts for myself, and co-creation. This kind of game I play with somebody else, and that to me feels like a different version of a platform that I think is. So this it's kind of like the difference. There's two different versions here. There's like the bundled version, which I think you kind of referenced. Like I should be able to push a button and get the everything pre-assembled in a highly opinionated way and just start coding,
Hmm.
kind of the Heroku experience. And then there's this other one, which is maybe like a composable platform or a unbundled platform that allows me to kind of like reassemble it in slightly different ways or decompose and recompose. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that that probably is. If I think I understand what you're saying, I think it might just be about the level of abstraction because you go into a Starbucks and if I want mine made with fresh salmon roe, that is probably not going to happen. Like that
Yep.
is not a user configuration I can add.
Yep.
Not saying I should because that'd be fucking weird. But there is some constraints, and actually to keep building on your infrastructure of the shop and the chairs and the chalkboards, part of that infrastructure is, in theory, um, highly trained baristas that know how to both entertain in that way, that interaction experiences you have,
Yep.
and to be able to understand how to accommodate within the constraints that they've provided in the store,
Yep. That's
right?
right.
And so there is like, so I take it from like the push button assembly up a level. You're still vying in a set of constraints. And Starbucks has chosen to try to put more behind the scenes infrastructure in the training, the onboarding, the getting everybody onto the same, like getting all the Starbucks people onto the same boat,
Yep.
with regards to paying for that. If only they made enough money to pay all of those baristas enough.
That's weird
um,
how that
it's
works.
hard because I know they're struggling
Yeah.
financially,
Absolutely.
Starbucks.
Yeah. Definitely. Um,
But I think to the same extent, when you think about like what are some of those composition patterns, like as soon as, well, so I think there's a couple different levels of abstraction. One is like, um I've got a platform that handles something so generic, maybe like, I mean, I know this is probably trope at this point, but like account information, secure, like stuff that every single one of your products is going to need, like authentication, like all those types of things that can be very cross-cutting for everything.
absolutely. Yeah.
Then maybe you've got a couple of products, like a subfamily. They might have a shared backend, but maybe that's only like two adjacent products.
Yep.
You get Once you get something that, in my opinion, is so customized, like I want the salmon roe in my coffee.
Yep.
Now we're at a platform, and this is where I think sometimes people that are out to build fiefdoms or stake their land in the ground, like, we're a platform. You're not a platform. You're literally just that product's backend.
That's right.
That
Yep.
should just be one team. Like,
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
just stop. Um, and so, I mean, I think those are kind of moving up and down that level of abstraction. If you need something so custom, and this is we build it, should it go in the platform? Should it go in the platform? Well, only if we expect it to be reused. Well, reused by whom? Well, reused within this subfamily, reused within the whole family, reused across everybody, so reusable we can sell it, right? Like, traversing that stack a little bit helps me understand where and how much of a platform
Yeah.
it might be.
Yeah. Sometimes when I think about this point that you're making, sometimes I think about it as there's this weird thing that happens in architecture in the 90s, early 2010 timeframe, right? We go from like stuff that pretty much people are developing by themselves or in very small teams, shrink wrapped and or deployed on one or two servers. I mean, even kind of the bigger things are small clusters, not very big. Um, and we move kind of more and more into more and more complexity, right? And so when I think about trying to figure out how these platforms are gonna play with each other well. lost my idea. I hate that. What did you just say 2 seconds ago so I can remember? I hate that.
Clusters, increasing
Clusters,
complexity,
increasing complexity, but that's what I was saying. Anyway,
oh,
um,
the
there's this,
levels of abstraction.
yeah. So the levels of abstraction you're describing, I think people get confused because as the things become more complex, they actually also be the burden of operation shifts, right? So it used to be like shrink wrap. I'm going to send you the application. You know who has to operate the application? You. That's your problem, not my problem. But and then we kind of move to web based things, which is like small operational concerns, but definitely on my side now, not on your side. Like you're not operating the website. But now we move towards these larger and larger, more complex systems, and the whole point of a SaaS system or a PaaS system is to transfer the operational burden and centralize it into one organization as opposed to distributing it, right? Um, and so I think that can get confused where you have old architecture was like a three-layered stack, your back end, your middleware, and your front end, right? And you got this new stuff, which is infrastructure, platform, and application. And people think that they kind of are aligned, but really they're not because these things are operated things. These things are source code
But there are
things.
three on either side.
There's
It's the
three
same
on either
thing.
side. And so that's why I think you get that observation you had, which was, you think just because you're the middle tier, like you're operating in the middleware that suddenly you're a platform. But no, that's a legacy way of thinking about architecture, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
So yeah, I think that's frustrating and weird for people to have to deal with. Um, so I mean, what other things do you think when we look at platforms? What else is kind of different between kind of a product and a platform? How would you differentiate them? Because I I'm
Mhm.
suspicious that they are different things. I mean, we've described some properties already that I think are already different, right?
I don't know. I mean, I guess this comes back to it's the same trap as to like how do you define what a product is? I think there's as soon as I mean, I what is or isn't a platform versus a product? I mean, I one of the reasons that I kind of liked how well actually so there's a guy I met Steve Perea, the value stream guy.
Yep.
Like he kind of like I like he even does things more simply than topologies, which is like there's only two things. There's like value creation streams and enabling streams. And topologies breaks it down into like enabling means like these like more service-based teams. It's temporary, they help you, it's more consultative.
Yep.
Platforms, there's more of a permanent type of structure between the two. I don't know. I mean, I think that I guess if I had like why or how would they be different? I mean, I don't know if they really are fundamentally, but like if you just take a big step back and look at like we've got a thing that we're trying to solve. A platform is trying to solve like near focused needs for products who are trying to serve needs of customers.
Yep.
You're still meeting needs. Like I think the idea that a platform can shift over time. I think I don't know. I would probably guess that I don't know. I see the patterns and I see them as the same patterns. When does a feature become a product? This is one of my favorite things.
Yep.
Or one of my favorite things to tell people is like if you're the product leader for Microsoft Word and the product leader for Microsoft Excel, like one way if you're trying to do like product identification is there should generally be a low decision dependency between the two things you think are product. Because if the product leader for Microsoft Word needs to go check for every feature in their backlog with the product leader of Microsoft Excel, that would be fucking weird, right? Like
Yep.
Word should be able to add to Word, Excel should be able to add to Word. Should they talk? Yes, but like their strategies, their focuses should be more or less decision independent.
Yep.
So one thing that comes up is, well, what happens when that stops becoming true? What
Yep.
happens when, as the product leader of Word, you're realizing like more and more of your features are actually requiring Excel type integration? Well, I don't think that's an indication that done our internal product idea or discovery wrongly. I think what it might sometimes mean is the market now wants fucking OneNote, or it wants a new type of product, and you should listen to those signals,
Yep.
and maybe you co-create for some temporary period of time some new things to incubate this.
Yep.
I think the exact same thing is true on the platform. You've got a product. It's got a back end. You need some stuff done. It does some stuff. You buy, build, acquire an adjacency. It needs some of the same stuff. So maybe to begin with, you do some dependency management to plug it in, but then over time you want to toss it out. I think one of the biggest things that I like about some of the stuff that they write about in topologies is the fluidity of all these things. A platform might not always have been a platform. It might have just been a back end. It might
Mm-hmm.
become a product when you can actually sell it to the
Yep.
public for a reason. So all of these things shift.
Yep.
I think we have that idea in in product where we have more people have written more often about the idea of like we've got our cash cow product, but it's our legacy product. We've got our new flagship product. We're looking to sunset our product. We already have a lot of words that we use to describe these different phases in a market, phases in with regards to the usefulness of the business return for our products.
Yeah.
I don't see as much I don't see as much of that type of verbiage being either applied to platform or people talking about it in different ways. I just kind of
Totally.
I see it as more of a binary
Yep.
conversation. It's we've moved from DevOps to platform. I don't even know what the fuck that really means, but um, it's yeah. It, I, what does sunsetting a platform look like? What does it mean? Are we talking about new flagship platforms?
Yeah.
Are we talking about how it teases, and does it, you know, and it's not, I don't even think it's necessarily just the culmination of code and features and capabilities in the platform, but how do we choose to work together as the humans between the two
Yeah.
things? And I
Totally.
think that's really important too. That's socio-techy stuff, but I mean, we can certainly draw a clear line of demarcation. You ask me to do a thing for you, I do it for you, and hopefully we do that in an incremental, iterative way. But or I trust you to work in my platform, or I trust you but with a guide, or I trust you but we're going to pair, or
Yep.
you know, I trust you completely and you just check stuff in and we're good enough to monitor and review more automatically. I- all those things, I don't know. I mean, increase the complexity, make it more fluid, make it a lot less binary.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's a couple things that I think about, like, so that I think are different for me in my mind. So the first one is just, and you mentioned it earlier a little bit, like platforms deploy commonly held resources, or the way you said it is, if it's not being shared, right? So to me, like one of the skills that a platform team or platform manager might need to have that's different than the same sort of skill for a product team is just this idea that they need to understand how to facilitate a conversation across teams. Like, how are we going to use these things? How, like, you both want something that's very similar. How are we going to figure out what the most overlapping version of it is so we can put that part in the platform for you? And then, allow you to compose
Hmm.
or restructure parts of it for your particular application while kind of creating a common core. And to me, that's not a question that's regularly asked by product people.
I think I see it, and maybe my product experience has been more in the B2B space than the
Mm,
B2C space.
yeah,
I would
yeah,
guess you're right. I would strongly agree from my experience in B2C is you're not, when you think about who your users are, you're not talking to, you might do some user research or some studies or whatever, but you're not trying to get them to talk to each other
that's right.
to
Yeah,
convince them how to use it or how they should
that's
be
right.
using it.
Yeah,
I will say it was, for at least my experience, it wasn't an uncommon experience to understand who some of your strategic B2B customers were.
yeah,
So like if you're doing business with banking and one of your customers is HSBC and you know there's a bunch of banks that if like that's how HSBC is doing it, we're going to go ahead and just follow along,
yep,
right? So sometimes when if you have two HSBC, like if you've got two big gorillas that are your customers, I was in a situation where there was like a Home Depot and a Walmart were both like customers of this backend system that I was over, and yeah, it was important for us to get together with them as strategic clients and
Yep.
treat them as strategic partners.
Yep.
And I wouldn't go so far, like at least in this particular case, there was not a services component specifically,
Yep.
but there is a little bit of like, you're saying you think you need this bespoke thing for your situation. Let's unpack that
Yep.
because we don't want to have 50 different specialty solutions, or at least one specialty solution for every major strategic partner.
Yeah.
So I do think I have seen that conversation in the B2B space a little
Yeah.
bit,
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I
but
mean,
it's definitely a skill.
yep.
And I think it's maybe, I don't know, this might be interesting too, because maybe it's a very similar skill, but like trying to navigate that conversation between like, in some ways, I think it might, I'm not sure which would be easier or harder. Like trying to convince two people, like say the CTO of Walmart and the CTO of Home Depot to get together and agree on something when they mostly like they just see you as the people they're paying. So they're
Right.
almost their de facto response is shut the fuck up and do what I'm paying you
Yeah.
for.
Yep.
Except you're not actually paying me for a bespoke solution.
Exactly.
You're paying, right? They don't realize like, oh,
Yep.
what you really want me to do is spin up a wholly owned subsidiary to service just you, and I'm
Yep.
certain you don't want to pay that.
Yep.
So that's a challenging thing, but in my experience, sometimes it's easier to get those people to at least talk about their commonalities
Yep.
than it is to navigate internal politics. Like when you've got an internal consumer and it kind of means like, hey man, if you don't make my bespoke thing, you're going to fuck up my timelines and now I
Yeah.
don't get my
Exactly.
bonus this year.
Exactly. Yep.
That is so I mean, maybe it's something about understanding that organizational politics, maybe some light org design stuff,
Hmm.
understanding how those elements all fit together, and then the ability to like I don't know talk with a higher order or different level of stakeholder team to say, hey, clearly like this is I don't know, this might be a too obvious example, but if we can't get them to agree internally, something else in the system is broken.
Yeah.
Either
Totally.
our
Yep.
cultural norms are off, our incentive program is off, or our strategy is not clear and able
Yep.
to be aligned to, because
Yep.
this should be an easy trade-off to be made
Yeah.
if
I think
if
that's
all
right.
of those things were true.
Yeah, and I think if you buy into kind of the flow theory of value stream and platform accelerating value stream type stuff, you should be able to have that conversation with an executive and say, listen, the way that you're operating this is not just eliminating reuse, it's
Yeah.
eliminating kind of operational burden, and the complexity of the system is being reduced so it's easier to
Yeah.
operate. All those questions and concerns, and to me, so for me, like, I think the whole argument about reuse is less interesting to me than the reduction of operating burden, right? Because I think like the classic example is like every dollar you spend in development, you spend 10 in operations. So like if you could reduce 1/10 of your operational burden, it would be equivalent to reducing all of your development burden, right? It's just like it, it's such a high leverage way to improve the system,
Mm.
partially because it's been ignored so much, but also because it's the longer lasting part of the system. So reducing that burden, and I think this is not hard to prove in the market. That's why AWS exists. That's why kind of Google Cloud exists. It's why Azure exists. Is because people want to offload the operational burden that they can't figure out how to lower for themselves to someone who's figured out how to lower the burden for them, and they pay a lot for that.
Do you see people? I mean, that is sort of true. Although, do you see that as just a natural evolution? Because I mean, I do feel like there's some people, maybe I don't know if these are just folks that don't grok it very well. Anyway, my question was, I see some people starting to backpedal on that, like
Totally,
pretty publicly, actually.
absolutely,
That hey, we thought there was this boon, we thought it was going to make a ton of sense, and actually there were these other
absolutely.
concerns, these other values that we didn't understand. It was more than just the dollar. So do you think we're going to see a pendulum shift come
I think
back, or do you think?
I think you're going to see two things, right? A, you're going to see a lot of repatriation, right? Which is just them figuring out. I mean, so like the classic kind of, at least kind of rumory story about this is like Netflix. They start on AWS because they can't predict their load well. So
Right.
they're like not good at predicting their load. And partially because they're growing really quickly. They're in the middle of the tornado kind of part of the experience. And so it's very hard to predict anything. And so they're basically just buying an insurance policy, right? They're just like, I will pay you to ensure that I have access to machines because if I have to make sure I have access to machines, I could either massively overbuy or massively underbuy very, very easily. Just
Yeah.
really small things. So I'm willing to pay for the insurance. But then they, run for a couple of years and they figure out, no, like the load on certain services is just very steady and we don't need to pay that insurance policy anymore. We're going to
Yeah.
repatriate. And they did. They repatriated a bunch of stuff. But I
It
think
feels like a lot of the same reasons people just went with Oracle blindly in the infrastructure of yesteryear, or would just like, let's just go with Red Hat
absolutely.
because like,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. And so I think that the cost for not Netflixy level sophisticated organizations is
yeah,
that they pay for the cloud experience, right? They pay out their nose for that experience. They have a lot of financial pain, and of course, there's millions of stories of like dude left, service on, and it just spun, $100,000 overnight or something like that,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, and but they also have de-skilled themselves because part of what their promise they thought was, oh, the way I make the money, the difference back, the business
yeah,
case is I can get rid of all these operators.
yeah.
And so then they try to repatriate and they're like, we have completely de-skilled the organization. We don't know how to operate things very well. We don't have people who are capable of operations anymore. We
Mm,
haven't kind of we have a whole bunch of secrets in the building now that nobody really knows how to undo, all that kind of stuff. So I
mm.
think that's going to be a big pain point for a lot of people around these things. And then the other thing that I like to argue, although not everybody agrees with me, is certainly not the Googles and Amazon-y people out there. But I don't like AWS to me isn't a platform. AWS to me is a service catalog that you have to
Mm.
compose for yourself. You have to put it together. And to me, that's the interesting thing to play with platforms right now is like
Mm.
one of the ways that I sometimes say is everybody wants the Heroku experience without having to use Heroku in specific, right? They want that's the experience they want, but they want to use their own stuff. So it's kind of like to me it's like a race to figure out the practices, methods, technologies involved in basically creating customized platforms with that level of developer experience, right? Like that's the golden platform
Mm.
idea. I think that I think people will start pursuing more and more frequently soon. Um, so
Because they really need, I mean, I'm kind of curious about that because, I mean, a similar pattern exists over in the ERP space where if you're willing to change your business to have its business functions flow how the ERP thinks you should, then you need near zero customization,
yep,
and the ERP is an almost out of the box solution.
yep,
But because a lot of people think their baby's special, and maybe it is in some cases,
yep.
or they think the cost is too high of retooling their business processes, they now ask for, a customization plan. And as you know, Oracle ERP, SAP, I mean, these are billions of dollars of
Yep.
services
Yep.
that, so do you think like that's going to be, so I mean, clearly like in an SAP situation, you're paying niche people a niche rate to come and do custom implementations of SAP for you.
Yep.
Do you think the interesting part of platforms is to offer that same level of customization, but in a way that's more configurable by the user, so you don't have to have that specialty
So
niche services
I
provider?
I think you and I have both seen this in multiple places. It's the like we have 6 or 7 versions of SAP running. We have like many versions of ERP, And you go like,
Yeah.
how did that happen? You're like, well, we acquire companies and we are big, so the companies we acquire are reasonably large size, so they had an ERP, and so now we have two or three. Are they like breeding like rabbits out back?
We left two ERPs out back, and
It's
now we've
terrible.
got four. I don't know what happened.
The tribling of ERPs. um,
Triple ERP. Love it.
Uh, so I think, but it's the classic like CTO suicide mission, which is like to consolidate the ERPs, and it's because, as you're describing, they've been customized, right? So you can't kind of get rid of them. They also end up being a little bit of the fiefdom argument you had, like when you acquire the company, the people in that company don't want to let their ERP be ingested into a larger system because it means that they have less job security, blah blah, all that kind of stuff, right? Um, but I think the problem with that, or like the main kind of conceptual thing that I would say, is the business logic is in the wrong place in an SAP system. They're
Hmm.
not consuming it through an interface. They're customizing the inside. It's like you shouldn't customize the inside of your platform. You should compose standard services into a platform that you build on the business logic on top of.
Yeah.
That I think is how you avoid that long-term problem, which is definitely absolutely a problem. And I think but I think to me, SAP is the same problem you were describing with Oracle, right? Like, we'll just go with Oracle, we'll write everything as a stored procedure, and we'll double down by doing it in PSQL. What could go wrong?
Yeah.
Other than 10 years from now, Oracle is literally holding me at ransom and having fun with that.
I mean, do you see that? I mean, I feel like we're just socially generally going down that path. I just got a note. I'm not a Spotify user, so maybe one of the few. I actually paid for Google Music way back in the day. And one of the reasons I went with Google Music way back in the day was I don't know if anybody is old enough to remember what MP3s are. Those were the things we used to rip off of these little shiny discs called CDs,
Yep.
which is what came after these things called tapes.
Yep.
Um, but I had a large MP3 catalog on my computer. And at the time, if I had MP3s on my local device, when I first installed Google Music, it would scan through any directories I told it to, find MP3s, and give me access to their high quality version of that
Yep.
music, the metadata, the album labels, like all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I went with that over iTunes or Spotify at the time. And that was years ago. It was free. Then they started to pay a little bit. I didn't mind because what I was getting for what I was paying was the music subscription for access to everything that I didn't own already, and also no commercials in my YouTube or something like that, which was a nice, like,
Yep.
a little side benefit. Well, I just got a notification that they're like changing pricing and packaging again. They've split out YouTube Premium from YouTube Music. Music is cheaper, Premium is more expensive. And what I don't know now, because I didn't keep those MP3s, I should have maybe. Um, but now I've got this big question mark about, okay, well, let's say I'm tired of all of that and I don't want to pay them anymore, and I'm happy with whatever few hundred MP3s I had originally. I don't know how to get those.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I can download things. I don't know if I can keep them. I don't know if they're DRM. I don't know if they are DRM'd, if I can keep them, if I get, anyways, the whole subscription thing, like, it just seems like this is where we're headed socially with our music, with our videos. We don't own anything anymore. We rent everything. And I don't know, like, how do we not become beholden to the oracles with the stored procedures, or the Amazons, because we've like tightly integrated with their services in a non-abstract way we can't easily. And I mean, even to that extent, like, how many music providers are there? Three?
Yep.
I mean, I can name Amazon, Spotify, and Google. How many platforms are there? I mean, Heroku, AWS, Azure, like, I mean, the cloud, what's the pivotal?
Yeah.
I mean, like, how many are out there though? Like, my guess is there's probably like three to four main ones. Triple that for the next tier down, and then a bunch of question marks.
Yeah.
But how many people are? I don't know. I mean, I do know there are some companies specifically using multiple services like that
Yeah.
to make themselves have to be immune to it, but
Yeah.
I don't think that's very common.
Yeah. I don't think so either. But but again, I still think, for instance, if you use AWS, like they give you a bunch of primitives, right? They don't give you like a whole platform. You can't just start coding. It's not a Heroku experience, right?
Hmm. That's true.
So,
You have to build on top of that yet again.
yep,
And
yep.
I don't know enough about the Azure environment, I suppose, to make a comment. But
I think that's pretty similar, and that's part of what I mean by like your own platform, right? I don't think people should go out and try to build Heroku for themselves. I
yeah,
do think that they could compose a Heroku like experience for their developers and their operators, and that would probably have some value to it, right?
yeah, I could see that. I also wish we just had more providers in the space because
Totally, yeah, absolutely,
I have two or three. Yeah,
yeah. Or again, like technology that enables that composability and decomposability for teams and
yeah.
organizations would be really interesting to me.
I wonder if if everybody started following the composer route, which would be interesting, like how much, I mean, how much now? I don't know enough about this. Like how much can you pick and choose between the offerings? Can you
Yeah.
compose between AWS and Azure?
The main thing that I think you're going to end up with there is kind of the data gravity problem, right? Like you might be able to
Mm,
compose functions, but it's very hard to pay for it if you have to slosh the data all over the planet all the time, right? Like so
yeah, yeah.
the data gravity plus a gate around the data that's called your extraction costs. That's really your exfil is just extremely expensive, right? So I think, and that's like it reminds me of another thing, kind of. So your story about kind of like being it's lock in story a little bit, Google lock in, and again like
Ish, yeah.
you de-skilled yourself by getting rid of certain technologies, and now you don't have access to them anymore. Blah blah
Yeah.
blah. But I think there's an opposite version of this. So I was the CTO of this library company. One of the most frustrating experiences that I would have is that there was this format called Mark 21, and Mark 21 is so old that it has a leader on it. So it's got like a data structure that's like broken by certain characters for which data field you're in. But at the beginning of the whole record, you have to calculate the position of each marker and put it
Mm,
in the beginning of the record in a specific format. And the reason for this is because if you are on a tape drive, because your data is all on a tape drive, obviously,
yeah. Where else would it be?
you can read the beginning of the record and spin to any particular field because you know what the bit depth, right? So you know where to go on the tape. So obviously, no one is actually using this leader. No one is doing this. Nobody has
Right.
no large library or small library has tape drives anymore. You still have to calculate it. And one of the reasons that's true is because the libraries won't let you change because it's a standard. And if it's a standard, they can extract their data and move it somewhere else. So they
Yeah.
don't want you to change don't make a custom format, because if you make a custom format, it means that I'm locked into you. I can't get my data out and put it in another system easily, right?
Yeah.
So it's like this weird way in which like standards enforcement becomes another version of enshittification of a platform. Like it forces the platform to stay in this like
Yeah.
regressive old school way of thinking about the world. You know?
Yeah, I suppose you can try to, build some insulation around that in hopes that, I mean, I don't know. Like I had a similar experience when I was a principal engineer at the railroad at this time, but we had the same kind of problem with something called EDI, electronic data interchange.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it was a government imposed standard, so railroads can interoperate across railroads. Same
Yep.
kind of general problem, but I guess one upside was the railroad that I was working at. I mean, it was one of the big three or four. I think it was three at that time. I mean, they were all lobbying the government anyways, so they actually had some influence over what that government standard was. So, and we were the biggest railroad, so we kind of had a lot of that going for us. But that, trying to insulate yourself from that was still considered a good practice. I say practice, not policy, because it's not like it wasn't adhered to everywhere.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
those types of problems tend to manifest down at such a tactical level sometimes that if you've got a new group, a new dev, a new anything, and they don't know that they should be doing stuff. I mean, I don't know if you can consolidate that and then wrapper itself. So then, I mean, that would be kind of I think the top of the mountain would be you can centralize that and then only expose it through the interfaces that you'd want in
Yeah.
that way. You
Yeah.
could solve the problem. But man, that would be a huge effort to go back because it had already bled out everywhere. So like,
Totally.
how
Yep.
would you unfuck that? Can't put
Leaky abstractions. The curse
so
of every.
so leaky. I mean, like BP Gulf of Mexico, just
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. So I
crazy.
had like one more thing that I wanted to talk about because it's like I think it's another thing that I think about when I think about products and platforms. And I think you touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to put it in some slightly more concrete terms in my or the way that I think about it, I guess. And it's this idea that like a platform is a different level of quality, and I don't mean like better quality. I mean different quality. It's got different needs different qualities, right? And so one of the ways I try to explain this sometimes is like Josh Karevsky's awesome talk about what does he call it? The Mona Lisa talk where he talks about like incremental elaboration. Is that what he calls it? That's what I
Oh,
call
is
it.
that Josh or Jeff?
Well, I saw Josh talk about it,
Oh,
so
okay, that's fair.
maybe
I
he
don't
stole it from
remember.
Jeff. I don't know. Anyway, so the idea right behind the talk is this idea that like if you were very early on with a feature, uh, you wouldn't want to do like perfectly idiomatic code that's completely unit tested before you actually validate that anybody wants the damn thing, because then it's a lot of waste. You're like you
Yeah,
invested
totally.
all this time, and not just that, it takes you longer, so you don't spin as fast on the validation cycles and stuff like that. But then obviously there's this other idea that says, okay, so once you validate it, then you should refactor it, and then maybe add some unit tests to it, and then add integration testing, so that like you're adding layers of quality onto the system. And so like it goes from being a level of quality appropriate for a prototype to a level of quality appropriate for production, right? And one of the things I like to argue is that I think that one of the things that a platform does is it adds different qualities to something that used to only belong to one application. So like the really simple ones might be like multi-tenancy, integration with an observability platform across some other concerns so that an operator can keep an eye on this new feature. Like there's other things that you add into the code to make it platform. And so in that way, like I kind of
Hmm.
think that like a platform team probably could get a pull request. Like we've agreed that this is the best version of the shopping cart that we're using right now. So let's put that on the platform, get a pull request, and then like the platform goes to work on validated functions that just need different quality in order to be on a platform, right? And that they add that particular platformable quality to the thing. Does that make sense? I mean, like I think that's how
I
I
think
kind of
so.
think about like part of what a platform is it has different qualities than the
And
application.
maybe a different application. And tell me if I'm picking up what you're laying down. But like if the platform team can think about security and then everybody inherits the security for free,
Yep.
you're only worrying about that quality concern in one area.
Yep.
Is that an example of what you're
Yeah,
talking about?
I think that would
Yeah.
be right. Yep. Or
Yeah, I
like
think it's good.
you have an application. We have a bunch of applications that don't share any single sign-on. Let's pick one, the best implementation we have, and
Yeah.
then slice it off the back of everything else and stick it in. But only after the platform team like integrates it with the logging, like all the stuff that's already on the
Yeah.
platform.
Yeah, I think that's a big benefit. I think one thing that kind of flipping it around a little bit that I think some product people will need to get better at doing is, and in theory, product people should be good at this anyways, but giving up how much they care about the implementation patterns, right?
100%.
Like,
Yep.
you have to be okay understanding that what you're trying to do as a product person is put more, market facing things in there. And I get that some of those things are invisible and long term or aren't problems until they are, like reliability, security, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Um, but it's weird. I mean, I've seen some product leaders pick some really weird fucking hills to die on when it came to things like authentication or security. Sometimes it's valid. Like
Yep.
I actually see sometimes, security is a good one to pick on because I've definitely seen this recently where the security people are wanting stuff to be more secure because it's easier for them to have a high level of security for everything
Yep.
than makes sense for some applications usage. Like
Yep.
you don't actually need as much stringency around it.
Yep.
And so then on some ways it requires our product people to like increase their technical skill set. Like but they don't have to be technical. That's a whole other conversation. But like they need to know what those things are and where the right levers are to be able to have these constructive conversations about, for example, like security and risk and
Yep.
threat
Yep.
and that's so I mean I guess it's good. Maybe by seeing the platform world increase and grow and like increase our overarching specialization that will free up the time because I mean when if platforms didn't exist you would have the same problems. You'd still
Yep.
have the product guy working with probably some type of an architect or a lead engineer to do because those
Yep.
things don't go away.
Yep.
You still
That's right.
need them.
Yep.
And
I
in the
mean, it's
worst case
like,
scenario, they're not considering them.
yeah. I mean, it's like, the classic way of handling what you're describing is you got a solution architect who's trying to architect a particular application. You got an enterprise architect who isn't really an architect. It's more like an extension of procurement that's telling the solution architect, these are the tools that you can use to architect that application. You can't use any
Yeah.
other tools. And I will tell you why you can't use any of those tools because procurement will refuse to allow you to pay for the licensing
Right, right.
because I
Yeah.
talked to them about this
Yep.
topic, which seems less like doesn't seem very productive, and it's also like a system that's structured around authority-based decision making as opposed to any sort of like conversation, co-creation, and
Yeah.
like all these
Participatory.
thing partnership and stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it is a challenge when your procurement manager is really your lead solutions architect.
absolutely.
But
Yeah,
but I don't know. I mean, I guess you don't get angry at an antelope for or a lion for disemboweling an antelope. It's
absolutely. Yeah, they get paid for specific things
the
and they do the things that they're paid for.
as it's working as designed. Yeah.
Exactly. One more thing, because I think this is another thing that I think of differently. So, in a product, frequently, and I'm not saying this is necessarily good, but it does happen, right? The way to compete with another product is you start a feature war, and it's just like generate more
Mm.
features than the other person does,
Yep.
generate more difference every
Feature
time
pew
they.
pew.
Yeah, it's either we're trying to keep parity or we're trying to create differentiation. And it's a cycle of that to keep both products like differentiated enough that a customer could pick.
Yeah.
Probably based on something foolish, but that's what they're trying to do, right? Um, a platform would not be successful if it were doing that, right? Like a platform is not something where having a rapid growth in features is good. I think a platform is more like it would be better for a platform to have fewer functions that were widely adopted than many functions that had limited adoption per function, right?
So you're saying that's how it is, or that's how it should be? Because if it's
I
how it should be, that's also like I would say that's the same between product and platform. Like you shouldn't just be making features because features. You should be understanding the need, understanding how they map to the value you create, and only pick the ones that make sense.
But I think that part of what I'm pointing at is that like in at least in an internal platform, the economics is not it's not a competitive economic situation, right? Like you're not trying to beat some other platform in the business. Hopefully, if you're trying to outcompete some other platform in the business, again, that's probably a larger structural issue that you should probably deal with. But as a product in a marketplace, very frequently you are absolutely in a competitive situation where
Yeah.
if you don't do something to compete, you know, you're just gonna have a harder
Yeah, I
time.
guess I see. Well, I guess what I may know, of course, my context as a consultant is I'm typically called to go places that need help, so that's probably good. But So things that I see in that vein are, and I see that I probably the number one thing that sucks for platforms, or at least makes them bloat beyond usefulness, is people, leadership people, and technical leadership people that I would like to think should know better if they're managing this type of stuff, but seem to not, or maybe it's the system around them. But either way, they still want to manage the platforms like that product feature factory, which I agree the
Yep.
product shouldn't be managed that way either, but
Yep.
there is a truthiness that products do need to create features.
Yep.
Like we should be figuring out how to create the right features. With platforms, while we do want to enhance it with capabilities, we should probably be trying to get more people to use, whether that's push button Heroku or through composability, use the capabilities that we do have and only create new capabilities when we have a truly novel reason for
Yep.
needing it.
Yep.
I do still see many people who are in charge of platforms, backend systems, incentivized by their company to get reuse. It's still
Yep.
that stupid,
Yep.
boring ass reuse.
Yep.
And because nobody's really going down to like the service level detail and checking, and again, I see this everywhere.
Yep.
What's the best way to get reuse? Well, how do they measure reuse? Well, they have a high level service notation somewhere and they just count the number of app IDs or users or calls or whatever. And the best way to get more people to use it is add this little field and this little field and this little field. Next thing you know, this thing bloats beyond its bounded context
Yep.
and does a lot of bespoke shit. And you find
Yep.
out 90% of your users are using like 3% of your platform.
Yep.
And really what you have is a bunch of front end systems, back ends.
That's right.
And you should have encouraged them to build those themselves and taught them how to compose their needs with your needs.
Yep.
And so I like one thing that I've been advocating for any place that will listen to it is the fundamental nature of how we design strategy for platforms is different than products. The fundamental way we should be thinking about incentivizing our platform leaders is a little bit different. Like generally speaking, as long as we're doing it right, we do kind of incentivize product managers for more features, hopefully the right features, not just more. We actually want to incentivize like platform managers for fewer features. Like we've got more people on, we've only built targeted needed capabilities.
Yep.
And it's just a different way of thinking. I would encourage from a structural perspective that if that could all ladder up to like a head of platforms would actually be pretty useful, at least in most enterprise,
Yep.
traditionally tree structured hierarchies. It's
Yep.
just that's how they think, it's how they incentivize, it's how they bonus.
Yeah.
It would probably be better because then you could help fix that tree
Yeah.
of how their local cultural norms are for how those things work. And then you've got somebody that's at that same, head of level who can go to bat for the calls that you need to make with your peer group
Yep.
laterally across the chains, right? So
Yep.
that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, and like I'd hook that in to the previous thing you were saying about kind of like application or whatever developers, managers dying on weird hills, forcing a particular technology or technology decision and saying like I have to have this, right. And like one of the ways I try to talk to people about that as like a smell, like a code smell or a platform smell, is like um, in my mind the ideal interaction from an application team to a platform team would be the application team would say to the platform team, I'm about to deploy this new function or maybe an application.
Yeah.
Um, Here are the golden signals for the primitives. I expect these many network calls, this much data to go over the network. Like what's about to occur per user using this feature, right? Like what, and this should be calculable, right? Like I should know how many database queries I'm doing. I should understand how much data that's pushing roughly, all those types of things, and then uh, expressing that as opposed to I need an Oracle database
Mhm.
allows the operations and platform teams to say, okay, the platform can handle the
Yeah.
amount of load and the the signals that you're going to send to it, or hey, at the beginning of this, we talked about what you would need. You're asking for more than you would need, so that's fine. But we need to redesign some things on the platform side to make this load work. And then finally, more interesting discussions about, like, you predicted that 10,000 people would show up per day. We're hitting 20,000 people per day. Like, the system is getting to a point where it's not necessarily breaking, but it's certainly far outside its design parameters. So, like, let's figure out what to do preemptively about those things. So it's like, I sometimes call it like platform as an interface. It's like this way of like trying to keep the application team from piercing back into the behind the platform and like mucking around with things, as opposed to telling the platform team what they need, and making the platform team go, okay, we have designed something to solve for this.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, that kind of comes back. It's a more technical version of tell me the problem, not the solution.
Yep.
But I shouldn't care what my persistence mechanism is, in theory.
Right.
If we've abstracted away enough, I don't even have to worry about optimizing for it. It's just I ask for stuff, I get stuff, it comes from wherever it lives,
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. We have like sometimes we have really funny conversations at Ergo where we kind of talk about like where does a database live? Is it infrastructure? Is it a platform component, or is it an application component? And so like my take on it is that in general, a database is a part of an infrastructural component. It's a primitive component, and then a particularly configured database, like certain sizes and stuff like that, would be a platform thing. But the schema is actually an application thing. So it's more like the platform is configurable by sending it a schema, but the platform team then is responsible for making sure the database operates correctly, all this kind of stuff. And then, an infrastructure team is there to make sure that the right network data, storage, CPU, blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
I could see that. I wonder how, I mean, that has interesting implications if you were able to truly separate those things and have a schema actually live in a layer in a way that is agnostic, and maybe behind the scenes is actually being implemented by multiple databases,
right?
Multiple kinds of databases.
Yep.
Could be super, super awesome.
Yep.
And it would blow a lot of like old school data modeling out of the water. Like, you're either designing for a data warehouse or for a transactional database. Like, we're just gonna do everything. It's gonna be great.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. You should come back and we should talk about org design more next time. That would be super fun. And I'd love to talk to you about your Tech Boom framework as well, and get some more thinking about that out there. But it was super fun. You're gonna have some rum under the tiki.
Rum under the tiki. Well, it's Cinco de Mayo, so we've got some Tamana in. So definitely going to do some sipping tequila this evening. It's going to be good.
Excellent.
And then so all right, man. It was good to catch up.
Yeah, I hope to see you on your way down to the big show down in Florida.
Yeah, we got a couple of stops, so hopefully we've got 3 or 4 people jumping on the wagon in Cleveland, and we'll stop by Pittsburgh on our way out for sure.
Awesome, man. Well,
all right, man.
Thank you so much. Talk soon.
Yeah, good to chat. Talk care.